back, everybody. Can I Be Honest show. This is episode number 4. We're really happy to have you on Facebook and on YouTube. We'd love to see you invite friends, invite people that think that this is an important conversation we have. There's a lot that's happened this week. All 4 officers have been arrested in the George Floyd case. The protests and the riots continue, and there's a lot of divide about whether people think that's appropriate, inappropriate. There's a whole lot of things going on around that. Police brutality continues in the midst of that. And one of the things that's interesting to me is the fact that, like, you had the Minneapolis saying, hey, like, this stuff, the techniques that he used, we don't condone that. And that yet I've seen it time and time again play out in the footage from the riots. And so that's one of the things I'm interested in talking about. Again, thank you if you're just joining us. Please take some time to invite some people. Dewan, what are you thinking about as we go into the conversation this week? I forgot to mention we're having 2 police officers on with us. Excited about that. I think we really do need to hear some real conversations from the police themselves to represent and kind of bring some understanding to some of the things that we're all talking about anyway. Dewan, what are you looking forward to? What do you how are you processing this past week?
Well, I'm also excited to hear from the officers, of course. I've just been replaying some of the things that have happened this past week that are kind of highlights in my mind. I think about, the announcement that the president made regarding sending in the military, which was like so emotional. You and I jumped on and did kind of emergency video based on that. One of the things that was really interesting to me was the changing of the name of the street leading up to the White House. I think that it's going to be known moving forward as Black Lives Matter Lane, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a big, mural in the middle of the street with those words, letting you know the name of that street. I mean, so I'm interested in talking about all of this stuff. And as always, we have no shortage of things to talk about because
this is America.
I have a dream.
These are animals.
America preaches integration and practices segregation.
Why did you say Mexico?
A rising tide of discontent.
The South will rise again. I have a dream.
We have contrasting visions about what America is. What America is. America is.
This is America.
We have contrasting visions about what America is, and I think in my life, this is one of the clearest that has ever come across, and that's why we're doing this. Dewan, where do you want to go? As we're getting ready to bring these officers on, how do you want to set this up?
I definitely want to, hear from the officers. I want to hear from you even about like just the tone and the conversation that's being had now. I mean, in Detroit, we're seeing a lot less, tension between the officers and the police force and the protesters. The protesters are still going strong, but we're not seeing a lot of tension, right? But I think that one of the things that I'm interested to hear is like the officers' take on like the way that the protesters have been protesting. There's a lot of tension, a lot of discussion about, rioting and destruction of property versus peaceful protesting. And I'd like to throw a couple questions at the officers that they're probably not expecting about some of the discussions that happened in the NFL, right? We've seen the NFL change their tone and their approach, right? So I'm interested to hear if anybody has any thoughts on something like that, because I mean, we talked about that for a long time and very
about Drew Brees. I assume you're not talking about Drew Brees.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Drew Brees. I mean, Roger Goodell, right? Like he made an apology and said that we were wrong, right? So I'm excited to talk about like all of these things. As always, I wish we didn't have to talk about these things, but because we do, and we believe in being honest, and we believe in respecting everybody's perspective. Don't expect us to agree with each other. Don't expect this to be comfortable, right? But you can expect it to be honest. So, Steve, you want to share with them what they can do if they want to shoot questions to us, and if they even want to jump into the show?
Yep. So there's a text message, and I think we can scroll that text message. There it is at the bottom. 473-0499. So 313-473-0499. So send a text to that number. And what our behind the scenes young lady, it's not Ralph. A lot of you guys think that it's Ralph or that it's one of us. We're not looking at the text, and it's not Ralph either. It is a mystery woman, and she's gonna be looking at those. You can send her the comment. So this is if you want to come on live. If you don't want to come on live and you have a comment, make sure you put it in the live stream, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube, because other people will be able to see it and respond to it. We'll be kind of cherry picking some of those comments to respond to live, especially when the officers get on. I think it's a good time for you guys to be able to ask your questions. I have my questions. As I look at different things playing themselves out. So send a text to that number and 313-473-0499, and just tell them your name, tell them your question or your comment, and that's it. Then we'll bring you on. We'll give you the instructions and all that. One of the things that I have a lot of questions about the police. I'm ignorant about the police. I see videos, like I saw a video of a guy who, basically he was unarmed and he was shot. He had assaulted an officer. He basically had him in a foot lock, like he was grabbing his foot and twisting it back and forth. And then he let go of the guy and ran, and two other officers shot him. That I don't like. A lot of people responded like that's what he gets. Like and I'm like, dude, he was unarmed. Like I don't understand, like that, our mentality. So a lot of people think like, hey, that's what the law is. Like they say about I'm like, but they're trained though, right? I mean, aren't they trained to de-escalate? Aren't they trained to be able to like take people down, especially if there's three of them? What are their tasers for? Some people are like, they don't all have tasers, yada yada yada. But that's also been an interesting part of the conversation here in all of this, is that if you're a criminal and you die at the hands of the police, kind of serves you right, buddy. Like that's one thing, and I'm like, wow, like how broad the list of like criminal activities is, and like I don't know, my mind is kind of blown by that. So
yeah, so I would say, yeah, so a couple things I want us to stand guard for and guard ourselves. We'll bring people on to the show, and we have many thoughts and suggestions. What you'll find in stuff like this is most of the time, the person will be an expert on their own lived experience, right? Like I have a wide range of thoughts, understandings, and done a decent amount of studying on a bunch of subject matters as it pertains to race in America, right? But what I'm really an expert on is DeJuan's lived experience. So as we bring these officers on, I don't want them to feel the pressure of carrying the weight of knowing everything that's going through every officer's mind, but we really hope that they feel comfortable enough here to be honest. And let's have an honest dialogue. If you guys know that there's been people having these conversations in your chats, on your feed and in your thread, invite them on right now. Go ahead. We're getting ready to bring the officer up. Go ahead and invite people. Let them know that this conversation is happening, because we prefer for it to be interactive, right? Me and Steve have these conversations all the time. We are doing this so we can have this conversation with you in a respectful way where you can come with your honest opinion, your honest views, questions, and be respected here. So Steve, you want to introduce our first guest?
Yeah, we're bringing them on. So we're bringing on two at the same time.
Yeah,
I believe.
Yeah. So give us their names, and Ralph, you can go ahead and bring them on in. Get them out of that waiting room.
So one is Officer Mike Walters. Welcome, Mike. Thank you for being on.
Thanks for having me.
So Mike is Dearborn Heights, and then we have Donnell Jackson, and he's Lieutenant Donnell Jackson, and he's in Romulus. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves a little bit, and just kind of tell us a little bit about your service to these departments and your experience a little bit. Just a quick introduction, then we'll get into some of the questions.
Yeah. So can we start with you, Mike? Give us where you live, if that's okay. The city, that's good enough. Give us where you work, and also like your years on the force.
Okay. Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it. Officer Walters, call me Mike. Mike's fine. Been doing this for 4 years. I spent 2 years with the Detroit Police Department. Moved out to Dearborn Heights. I've been there for 2 years. Most recently, I've been working in the schools with the kids as a school officer. Mainly a lot of community relations. So that's been good. A different perspective. Um, Born and raised on Detroit's west side. Been out in the Romulus area for about the last decade or so.
Nice, nice. Thank you, thank you. Well, welcome to the show, Officer Jackson. Can you give us the same thing? Your name, where you're from, and where you're currently working, and your years on the force.
Absolutely. First and foremost, can you hear me okay? Because I'm getting a little bit of feedback from you guys. How am I coming across?
I'm picking you up fine.
Sounds good.
Okay, very good. My name is LeBritt Jackson. I am currently a lieutenant with the Romulus Police Department. Prior to that, I worked in Detroit for some years. I have a total of 20 years experience. I worked in the schools briefly. That guy right there, Mike, was one of my students when I worked in the school.
Small world.
It is. So it's really good to see him. It's good to see him working in the schools. Hopefully we can get into the importance of having the right people in this profession and the impact that you can have.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd like to hear from both of you real quick is what's your quick take on this? Like, what do you want people to know, like from your perspective, as you look at all of this?
Just just and Sergeant, Lieutenant Jackson probably attest to this, but I mean, I feel like a rock in between a hard place being on both sides because I've experienced both sides. I mean, not almost to the point of losing my life. I mean, there's so many different levels to just what people are crying out to nowadays. I mean, not only what police, but you have the court systems that are biased in sentencing. You've got the implicit bias of law enforcement and the lack of cultural diversity. You've got not even talking about the disparities in just the education and just the redlining the housing system, but people just need to come together with their emotions intact and just with the heart and the ear ready to listen because it's so many different perspectives and it's such a deep rooted issue, and it starts by just listening. And we got to keep pulling this thing apart, keep pulling the roots, keep pulling at it. Rome wasn't built overnight. So we have to keep tackling it, keep being vulnerable, keep being authentic, keep being intentional, and keep trying to make change. We have to talk about the situation because we like to just think we can just get over it, and it's not possible.
Thanks. Lieutenant Jackson, same to you.
I think Mike said it best. It's the dialogue. It's understanding that just because something is not your own experience doesn't mean it's not an experience. You said it, DeJuan. You can't argue with somebody's story. We can argue facts and figures all day, but my story is my story. So when somebody, in this case, where we have a group of people who felt disenfranchised for hundreds of years, crying out, it literally took somebody being murdered on TV right before your eyes. You witnessed a murder. It's almost like a snuff film for people to understand maybe these folks are not just complaining to be complaining. And as tragic as what happened was, if there's any good thing that can come out of this was the fact that now folks are really understanding that there's an issue. Police reform is something that I've been an advocate for the 19 of my 20 years doing this. I mean, I've worked with everybody from the Attorney General's office to officers in the city of Detroit who have their own nonprofits who are all about changing this thing from the inside out. So now, maybe people will understand they have to be the change that they want to see.
So the question, and we got a number of questions. The questions that I really want to throw to you guys is like, can you talk? And this is an assumption because, and if you don't experience this, just say like, no, that's not been my experience. But as I hear you guys talk about your own perspectives, and as I look at you, I mean, see two black officers, and then you talk about being on both sides of it. I can't help but like wonder if you guys feel lonely sometimes, right? Do you feel like outside of the officers that you work alongside of, like how you received in the community, especially when you're in uniform? Because the assumption is like we draw lines, right? We say like you're black, I'm white. You know what I mean? Like that says, in the way that we're shaped and we're taught, oftentimes that means, one's lion, one's hyena. You know what I mean? We're not supposed to get along. What's it like for you when you're wearing a uniform? How do you receive by the community? And is there a loneliness that comes along with wearing that uniform as a black man?
I'll start first, and I will say unequivocally, sometimes absolutely it is. You'll have a situation where folks in the community, and this obviously I'm talking about incidents, not my experiences. Now, this is not it's not monolithic. This isn't my everyday, but you'll have experiences where people ask, "How could you be a police officer? You're a sellout." And these are obviously coming from black people, where they don't understand that, just like you said, this isn't, I'm not picking sides. This is something that I felt strongly enough about where I decided over 20 years ago, this was going to be my contribution to society. This is how I was going to change something that I felt that needed to be changed. It wasn't, you know, I didn't, I didn't get bullied. I was an athlete in high school, athlete in college. It wasn't something where, I had aspirations to be a doctor. My undergrad, I was going to school for medicine, but it was something that I felt so strongly about where I changed my entire career path. So there are times where, when you have the open and honest dialogue, you can explain those things to people. Some people, they don't want to hear it. They don't care. They have their mind made up, and that's fine. I don't say I'm wasting my time, but if somebody refuses to understand you, at what point do you realize and just say, okay, you're one, but there's countless others who do want to hear what I have to say. So those are the people who you work in having those conversations with. And then sooner or later, some people are changed by your actions. You can see me, watch me work. You'll see how I do. You'll see how I get down, and then make your decisions based off the fruit I produce.
Question one more time. I'm sorry. That was so
So
eloquent
is,
spoken.
yeah, there is there. I was like really appreciating it as well. Is there a loneliness that comes with being a black man in a police uniform, like doing that job, right?
You know what? It is. A lot of it is, not even getting into on one side being a black man and on the other being a police officer. It's just that lack of knowledge, which is the glue. Like you said, Steve, at first, you had questions or common questions where it's kind of like, well, why didn't they use a taser? Or why does it take 2 or 3 officers? Or if the guy was running away, why did the cop shoot him in the back? And it's like under certain circumstances that is permitted under certain guidelines. So
Can you talk about that a little bit? Can you flesh that out a little bit? Because I think that's where there is. I think it's one thing to just understand what those guidelines are to some degree, and I don't know how much you guys can go into that. But I think there's a lot of assumptions all over the board about what those guidelines are or aren't. And so I look at something and I'm like, man, and other people are looking like, well, that's what they should have done. And so I really I think that's a point of, I think there's just I think that's left up to the public to kind of make their own thoughts. And so.
Okay. So you would like me to kind of get into that?
I would love it.
Okay, well, it was a case in prior to 1984. It was called the Tennessee versus Gardner fleeing felon rule. So with that case, it made it so officers could shoot a fleeing felon while he's fleeing under the circumstances when that person has committed murder in its attempt, um, arson, robbery, rape, carjacking, um, arson, aggravated assault. So under those guidelines, but see, me like a person like me growing up, a young guy, when I had social media, and maybe we're gonna get into this, but when I was on social media, you'll see these 10-second clips of an officer shooting somebody in the back, and it's like, well, there goes these pigs again. That fueled my ignorance and my hate for law enforcement. But when you see the whole 1 minute clip, it's like, okay, I understand why. And it's just, again, it's that general lack of knowledge. Being a black man or just being an officer both in the suburbs and the inner city, I've experienced just two different worlds. Like Lieutenant Jackson said, at least for me working in Detroit, and with the younger population, with us millennials, I've gotten that sellout. You're selling out, kissing up to the white man, your Uncle Tom. You sell out to your own race. But I understand that it's a deep level and a deep-rooted hurt because blacks and the police historically have always had this disparity of just violence and just calamity between one another. So I get that, and I'm able to sympathize and even have a mindset to even interact with them in a certain way because I've been there. And I tell young guys like, hey, this uniform makes me no different than you because it's been times as an officer off duty where I've been MF'd, I've been cursed out, I've been snatched out the car. All in all, at the end, when they find out I've got my badge in my pocket, it's like, oh, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say you were one of us? And it's like at the end of the day, I mean, literally,
Should I have to? Should I have to?
And it's like, I'm not one to use my gun and badge to get respect because if I am quick to do that, the next young person who comes along and meets that officer, they might not have that same luxury and it can go even further south. So if I don't do my due diligence and shed light to that officer, the next young man who can't flash his badge, he may get it twice as worse. I tell people I'm just like you.
So question.
Yeah.
Because if I was watching this, I would want to know this so bad. So what does your due diligence look like, right? Because what I think we would want to know is, do you report them, right? Is there something to report? Like somebody snatched you up out the car, you know what I mean, undeservingly. Do you pursue that? Because so that's it. Like what happens what has happened when that happened to you?
Like my stepmother always said, whatever you do in the dark comes to the light. And for me, people have always heard of that saying, the thin code blue, that the code blue of silence, that we have to look out for one another. But for me, I'm not going to jail for anybody. I snitch. They tell you stop snitching. I'll tell on you in a heartbeat. I tell people to be smart about it. Especially like on a traffic stop, interaction with the police. It's not the time to go back and forth. We're required to tell you our name and badge. So if you can, recollect the time, location, the date, get their information and file a formal complaint, absolutely. Because that could have simply been a relative of mine. If I don't say anything, they could have ran into somebody I've known or loved and done the same exact thing.
Yeah, no, that's good. And Steve, I want to hear your questions because I definitely want to hear some of the questions you have. But when I hear you say that, like that's what I teach my son, right? Like my son is 14, and it's so interesting, right? Because my daughter's 15 and she's actually driving, and I haven't had this conversation in the same amount of detail with her as I've had with him. But when I hear you say like that's not the time, that's exactly what I teach him. But like when I see videos of white dudes getting away with it, I'd be like, man, like why can't I, like, stand my ground and stand up for my rights when the officers like doing something that I disagree with? For me, like that's not my communication style. You know what I mean? I think that the way you communicate with people is contagious. I mean, I've had officers approach me in an aggressive manner, making assumptions, and then I simply ask them a question like, "Are you serious? Like, are you joking? Or are you serious right now? Like, I'm a 40-year-old man driving a pickup truck. Like, I'm definitely not, yelling out F the police. You know what I mean? It's like, no, dude. So, but that would de-escalate like his vibe. And that's like an actual situation that actually happened. But I just wanted to say, like, it still doesn't feel fair. Like if a white dude can sit there and ask questions, or a white woman can, and we can't because, like, escalation, you couple that with the fear and all the other things that are going on in those situations, it's just not worth it, in my opinion, right? But Steve, I do definitely want to get you to jump in with some of the questions, because I know that you were just as excited as I was, if not more, to have the officers on.
Yeah, so and we got a couple questions in the comments too that I'll get to in a second. I want to keep going down this lane. So you talked about when you can, when it's okay to in those certain situations. And there's a lot there. How do you get trained though? Like is that the thing, just or are you trained to, like, if possible, de-escalate? How do you view, like, what's happening? Like, particularly, I'm guessing you've seen some of the footage, like, of the knee on the neck in multiple situations since George Floyd, in the riots, those kind of things. So part of it is that kind of, like, what is your, like, tactically, chokeholds. Oh man, I saw a video today of a cop on top of a woman. Like, if you don't stop resisting, I'm gonna choke you out. I'm gonna choke you out. I'm like, Eric Garner, like, you know what I'm saying? So, like, I'm trying to figure out what's being said. Is like, this is what we do and don't do, and like what's actually happening, and when they're telling, like, when you make the choice to, like, pull the trigger, or be like, okay, well, there's 3 of us here and there's just one of him and he doesn't have it. He's like, he has no weapon, clearly. We can see his hands, so we're going to take him down, versus, like, we'll just kill him. Like, I'm trying to understand that. Like, that's really, I just don't get it. I know that's a lot, but. Uh-oh. Mr. Jackson, there's no volume. There's no audio. We can't hear you.
Ralph, try taking him to the backstage and bringing him back, seeing if you can do a sound check with him. You want to chime in on that question?
Yeah. So basically, your question is, Steve,
wait until you got your snack and then put it in your court.
Sorry. So you just want to know, are we given training on whether to shoot somebody under those circumstances? Is that what you're asking?
My thought is, like, you can de-escalate. Like, there's 3 of you and there's one dude with, like, nothing in his hands. Like, can you not take him down? Are you not trained to do that? Why shoot him? Like, and how is the law? Like, why is the law? Like, if that's the case, like, why is the law even like that? I don't know. It blows my mind. I understand, like, okay, if he's going for your weapon, and I've seen that, and I'm like, as soon as you go for the weapon, to me, it's kind of like, this is just me. It's kind of like game over. Like, man, I don't know what you expect from there. But, like, people like this, I just don't get it. So I'm trying to understand both what the training says about de-escalation and about taking people down, as well as just, like the law. Like, I don't, that's it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean, when you get into talking about force and the use of force, I know you asked me about this earlier, and I could probably get into that later, but we do have something called the use of force time continuum, which is used not only in Michigan, but I believe across the country. But basically that's saying, actually, I have a copy of it. So it's the use of force time continuum. So there's 5 different levels for both citizens and officers. So you have, starting from the bottom to the top, you have inactive resistance, passive resistance, active resistance, active aggression, then deadly force assault. That's on the citizen's standpoint. For us, you have officers' presence / verbal direction, compliance controls, physical controls, intermediate controls, and deadly force. So inactive resistance would be a person who's compliant, and you have, let's say, on our perspective, let's say your inactive resistance for you would be you being compliant, and for me, that'd be topped off or equated with officer presence or just my physical presence. Passive resistance for you would be dead weight, tensing the muscles, ignore my commands, and I combat that with compliance control. So at that point, I'll go my pressure points, the wrist locks, the arm holds. So basically, whenever you do one thing that fits one category, I fit the next. So when you're actively resisting, you're pushing, shoving, pulling. I use takedowns, strikes, which are physical controls. And if you go to active aggression, punching and kicking, I go to more intermediate weapons such as batons, tasers, OC spray, and deadly force. If you have a weapon, and this is where it gets tricky because people like to use and we've heard it so loosely. I feared for my safety. That's circumstantial. You got to take into consideration, that officer's level of martial arts training, your height and weight and size compared to the subject. I mean, I fought a guy who was like 5 foot, a buck 10 on cocaine, and he tossed me like a rag doll. So if the subject's under the influence of drugs, so I mean, it's all circumstantial at the end of the day.
So, Lieutenant Jackson, you back with us?
Yeah, I just switched the device. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Got you.
Very good. Like Mike said, some of it's training, but I've been an instructor, defensive tactics instructor, firearms instructor for years. So my opinion varies slightly. And mine has always been just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. I've been in some battles. I worked on the east side of Detroit for some years. That was the first precinct I worked. And I've literally fought for my life. Guns involved, the whole nine, and all of us walked away okay. Not saying that that's going to happen in every situation, but one of the first things that an officer should always be thinking is preservation of life, your own and everyone else's. I don't take a lot of things personal, meaning, if I'm out there in the street, somebody says something or does something, I don't take I don't take it personal to the point where I feel like I have to get my pound of flesh, if you will, and exact some sort of vengeance on you. I've always looked at it as a game. There's two sides to the game. We're on one side and the quote unquote bad guys on the other. And I use the term jokingly that it's not personal. If you run and you get away, hey, you're just faster. If I catch you, I'm going to talk about you. I'm not going to beat you up or anything silly like that. I mean, my joke game is impeccable. So it's never been something where I have to take it personal. I think one of the biggest issues, some of the problems that we're facing in this profession, is too many of the wrong people have infiltrated. This has become, excuse my French, but the crap job for some people. You have somebody who they may have a degree, their career path didn't go the way they wanted, so they say, "I want to just get into policing because anybody can do it." This job is not for anybody. This is the job where you should aspire to be, so that your whole life you prepare for doing it the right way. When I worked in the schools, and I'm just happy to see Mike here because Mike was he was a great kid, and he's a tremendous young man. So just to see that he is somebody of his caliber is in his profession, it gives me hope. I'm getting to the twilight of my career. So knowing that I'm leaving it in the hands of somebody like him, it gives me, I'm encouraged that the young folks who are coming behind him, when he eventually trains guys, they'll be trained the right way. And I'm not just necessarily talking about tactically, but having empathy, having compassion for people. Everybody doesn't need to go to jail. So we could literally talk about my opinions and my beliefs in law enforcement for the next 10 hours, because like I said, this is something I love doing. I've been able to help so many people, so many young people, just from the office of being a police officer. And more folks who feel the same way I do, we have to get into it. We see what happens when we don't.
So how do we get more of what you just talked about a few minutes ago when you talked about de-escalation? Because I think that's like, how does that become the norm? You know what I'm saying? What are your thoughts on that? And then we do have a couple questions we need to get to from the comments. Otherwise, it's just disrespectful to have people on here.
Absolutely. And like I was saying, it starts from the beginning. It starts from making sure the hiring process is you're looking for the right people. that you're asking the right questions. I don't care how big and how strong you are. Do you have compassion? Do you have empathy? Is it your primary goal to de-escalate a situation? I'm not the smallest guy, but I don't look to fight. I don't like fighting and all of that rolling around and all of that stuff. I don't look to do that. So if I can use the gift of gab to talk somebody out of whatever mind frame they're in, that's the first thing that I'm looking to do. If I haven't made a traffic stop in a long time, I sit behind a desk primarily, but I am responsible for who gets hired by my police department. I sit on our oral board, so I get to interview some of these folks that's coming in. And sometimes if people, they don't say the right things, if they don't have the right attitudes in certain questions, I get to tell them, no, you can't work here. You don't have the opportunity to police my neighbors. I live in the city that I work. So as I said, de-escalation starts from the beginning. It's not something that's so much, you can teach it. I can teach you those skills, but sometimes being empathetic, sometimes being able to understand that some people, one of my kids just fell up the stairs. So how that happens, I don't know. But it's just one of those things where you have to make sure that the people you're bringing into this job, they're doing it for the right reasons. And it's easy to teach. I can teach you, quote unquote, verbal judo because you're receptive to it. You don't look at yourself as a warrior. You look at yourself as I'm a police officer. I'm not at war with anybody. I don't like the term when officers call themselves warriors. I'm not at war. I'm a police officer.
So there's a couple questions along those lines from people. So one of the Lucy asked, in the past 5 to 10 years, have you seen a lot of the new cops come fresh out of the military? And then there's a Stephen Marshall also asked, is there a vetting system? How do you weed out the bad eggs? My question would be, is there a cleaning of house that needs to happen?
So let's give him one question at a time.
I mean, yeah, they're all.
Yeah. So shoot Lucy's question to him, and so Ralph, throw Lucy's question back up, and let's give Lucy's question again.
Last 5 to 10 years, are most of the new cops fresh out of the military?
What I've seen in my department, I'm from a smaller department. We have 40 officers total. In the past 10 years, we've only had one individual that came right out of the military. Other than that, folks have either come, from the private sector, other police departments, but I've only had one officer who came right out of the military.
And what does the vetting system look like? Like, how do you weed out the bad eggs? I think you kind of alluded to that. That's a question from Stephen Marshall.
Well, and I can speak for my own department in Detroit. Most departments have a similar hiring process. There's an oral interview. Sometimes there's a written test, basic aptitude. And then if you pass both of those, then you move on to a psychological exam, background investigation. Michigan, because of MCOs, which is the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, if you come from one department in the state of Michigan, your personnel file follows you. Everything that you've done, good, bad, or ugly, is in there. It's easily accessible. Sometimes you can have things removed, depending on the severity of. More often than not, they kind of stay with you at least 2 to 5 years. So you pass that, and then they offer you. Most departments have a conditional offer or hire. So there is a vetting process, but sometimes, unfortunately, some people can mask some of the things that they should disqualify you. It's kind of hard to see someone's heart. It's kind of hard to see, if this person's a coward, if this person, they have bad intentions. Sometimes these people unfortunately hide these things. Not everybody. We catch quite a few. I've turned quite a few people down. They've sat before me, and I don't like to say you can get a vibe, but you can just kind of tell when somebody they get the protect part down, but they don't want to get the serve part. They think serve is a bad word.
That's good. So, yeah, no, that's so I got a question. So shout out Brian Ferguson Bay. He's waving, saying what up to everybody. I see a Desmond Washington, Kevin Ambers, Mario Dewberry, Conte Woodley, Gina Peoples. I just wanted to give a shout out to some of the people out there. So you might have to go deep back in your memory, Lieutenant Jackson, but I want to know, when you guys came through your training, were there officers that were alongside of you that you looked at and you were like wondering, like are you one of those guys that are going to get off on like doing the wrong thing? Are you coming here to like? So I had a friend that was on DPD for a while. He's no longer there. I won't give his name, but I will share what he used to say. He would say that oftentimes you get officers that came from as far as the UP, and they come down here, go through DPD training, serve on the force for a short amount of time, get a old English D tatted on their arm, and ship back to where they were from, so they can go back and talk about how many brothers they beat down. So, like, did you have guys come through training? So if y'all there, y'all know that, like, y'all probably know better than I know, because this is something that was shared with me from an officer. But did you guys have anybody come through where you were like, man, like, we need to have somebody really watching this person. They need to be on with somebody strong because they look like they could potentially end up being that guy?
Yeah, man, just like Lieutenant Jackson said, you know, in the beginning stages, usually a person gets weeded out in the interview, in the psychology, in the psychological part of the background process. But a few actually do get to roam the streets. But you know, a person's true colors, they show over time, regardless. And what I've seen throughout just my 4 years, a lot of us young guys, we don't even tolerate that. I mean, like I said, I will tell on you in a heartbeat. And it's been times where I had to testify against my own officers. I had to go to internal affairs, which is each department has like it's like an integrity unit, which I don't say micromanages, but it investigates the wrongdoing of officers. So yes, absolutely, I've seen it.
But you're breaking the code, right? I mean, because there's like this unspoken police code, and just like there is in families, just like there is in a lot of things. And you talked about snitching specifically, but even within certain niches, like there's a code that you're going against. Like, how does that work? What's the, and how do you get the balls to do that? No, I'm serious.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be the change. And like Lieutenant Jackson says, you know, one day when I become a training officer, I can instill, because it starts from within. You know, these people who come, like when I was in the academy, for example, not to go off on a tangent, but you know, you have these guys, because in my academy class, out of 30 of us, there were like 6 black. And you're in a city that's what, 85% and some change, 85% black. And our instructors asked, like, you know, you guys coming from 2 hours, 3 hours out west, up north, have you guys ever seen a black person before? It's like, why are you coming here? But see, I've seen it where it's a social disparity where you have guys who come from out in the sticks where the most they've ever dealt with was a noise complaint or an intoxicated person. You come to the city of Detroit where you're dealing with domestic violences, which are pretty frequent, or armed robbery or this and that, and they're quick to pull their gun. And it's like, yo, no, you can't do that. I mean, it's a lack of cultural awareness and cultural diversity. I mean, it needs to be more of that in the training because, you know, I've seen it, and the media plays a part in this too. You know, if you are in a remote area and you haven't had much experience of a different race and you only go off what you see on TV, you're going to start to feel those implicit biases, and those fears are going to start to become a reality for you, you know? So, I mean, for me, like I said, I'm not going to jail for anybody. I will tell on you in a heartbeat, especially with these new officers that I've got the chance to train and ride along with. You know, if I can try to instill some good knowledge on you, and just, we talk about verbal judo, you know, that's police jargon for, you know, talking to somebody the proper way. You know, I've seen guys as big as Lieutenant Jackson who had to put in handcuffs, and it's like, if I fight this guy, I'm going to the hospital. And I've seen better outcomes from just talking to the person in a pair of handcuffs, as I say, than just trying to fight with somebody. You know, my words have been a much better tool, you know, using this. It's so easy that it's hard for some people to do, though, but I've seen the fruit of it.
Yep.
I got a question. I don't know if you got any questions. I got one coming from Brian Ferguson Bay. He wants to know, what are some recommendations that you provide to help citizens police the police?
Good question. Good question.
And that's a very good question. One of the things that I've recommended, I'm not super active on social media, but I've felt, you know, compelled to speak out on some things just in these last couple of weeks. And one of the things that I've really been a proponent on is people being actively involved. I mean, something as simple as picking up the phone and asking to see, hey, what is your use of force policy? Do you guys, because that particular tactic that was used in Minneapolis, it was allowed by the police department. Yeah, just because something is allowed doesn't mean you should use it for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So the difference becomes, if you're concerned, just pick up the phone and ask. You know, you can, I'll tell people here locally, pick up the phone and call us and ask us to see, you know, our policy on this. Ask if we have a citizen advisory board. We have right here in the city of Romulus, a police commission, which is made up of civilians. And they have a say so on what policies are made, what we implemented, even what training we teach and what equipment we use. So it starts really with that conversation. Something as simple as an email. My granddad used to say all the time, you can talk to anybody once you get their attention. So I would say, as a collective, law enforcement has the people's attention. So this is the time to start asking those questions that maybe people didn't know how. This is where you pick up the phone. If anybody in law enforcement now that would have you said balls, I say it's a lack of, to disrespect somebody now who just simply asked a question is crazy, because this is the time where questions can be answered. You can have those honest conversations, and people don't feel like they can hide behind anything now. And as the citizen, as the police department, we should always be part of the community. We should never think we're some occupying force. We should never look at ourselves as we're out here to do the dirty work. No, we're out here to be the police. We're out here to serve the community in whatever capacity the community needs. Sometimes, to me, service just means to meet a need. Sometimes somebody needs to go to jail, but that doesn't mean everybody needs to go. So once we decide as a society that this is what we're going to accept from our police department, then that's what we're going to accept. You know, when you allow things to happen, what I hope doesn't happen a month from now is this kind of goes on the back burner, and it takes another tragedy of somebody losing their life, you know, and then we have weeks of protests and weeks of sometimes social chaos for us to realize that this cannot keep going on this way.
Yep. What's qualified? Aunt Wafa asks, can you talk about what's qualified immunity for the police? So qualified immunity, and how do you feel about it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, basically, qualified immunity stands where if you do something within policy, you're protected by the police department. And it's a gift and a curse. I mean, for some people, if you're acting in good faith, I'll give you an example. A lady had locked her, and this is just something on a small scale. A lady had locked her keys in her car, and she called the police to come get her out. I don't steal cars. I'm not well versed in using the Slim Jim. So in the process of trying to get the keys out, I damaged her car door. She tried to sue us, and basically because we were acting in good faith, there was nothing that she could do. So, like I said, in some senses, it's a good thing. In others, it's not so much, because people act like they can go around with impunity doing things that they know they wouldn't do if it was their behind on the line solely. So, something to be looked at. And like I said, every situation is different. The situation that happened in Minneapolis that kind of sparked this conversation, everybody that was there, everybody was wearing a uniform there, I think they've been rightfully fired and rightfully charged. Because if you're standing there and because I posed the question to some of my guys, if those guys weren't officers and you rolled up in a car and saw some random guy with his knee on another dude's neck and that dude saying he couldn't breathe, you would have immediately taken him in the handcuffs and you'd arrested him. So what's the difference?
Yeah.
I appreciate that. No, I definitely appreciate that. Did you have enough? So I really want to hear their thoughts on the protests, the different forms of protests, those that led to vandalism, you know, and whatnot. Steve, did we have another question that you saw?
There was one that kind of, this will be the last one. This kind of goes right off of that. It said, what do you think, why do you think Derek Chauvin lynched George Floyd, and why did the other cops just stand there and watch? I mean, that's a lot. I think part of it is, I know you can't get inside the psyche and the thought process, but you know, just from your outside perspective, what do you think's going on there?
Like you said, I can't answer that question of why he did what he did. Just like when anybody else who commits a crime, I can't tell you why that person did that. I would just basically say it's a lack of empathy. This individual had a human being under his knee, and at no time did he feel like that this person was worth me taking my knee off of. So, just in looking at the time that guy had on, having the 19 years, and then just from information that's coming out, two of those guys were very, very new. One of them I heard, and I can't confirm this, but had only worked 4 shifts, so he had been on the job for 2 days. So sometimes, like with anything else, you have bullies. You have people who they carry themselves in a manner in which they intimidate other people. Not saying that's the case with him, but just looking at him, that day in Minneapolis, there was a couple things that I drew from that. He had those gloves on, and in the police department, I discourage anybody from wearing those gloves, those black leather gloves like that in the summer. It's not cold, so if here you are walking up on me and you have on those beat 'em up gloves, I'm thinking you're there to fight. So immediately you're presenting yourself in a hostile manner. So just looking at him, the way he carried himself, just the way he was looking, he probably was a bully. Those other officers may have been intimidated to speak up, but I never did well with bullies. I would just like to have thought if I was there, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. We'd have got the guy. If he had to go to jail, he had to go to jail. He would have went. It would have been anything, because those police citizen interactions, they go on every day. You're talking about thousands of interactions where nobody died. So that should have been just a routine arrest. Don't know what was going through that guy's mind or why it went that way. But like I said, I don't know what goes through any other criminal's mind either.
Yeah. Lieutenant Jackson just hit it right on the head. But for me, I believe issues like Derek Chauvin, it's deep rooted. That stems back from his own issues that he probably had. Not saying that he probably didn't do it before, but just even what you were saying, Steve, about the riots and the looters. When I say it's different aspects to it, I even look at the media, which I hate so much. I hate to say that, but you look at, for example, how you've got one group of people. Let's say you've got whites who are portrayed as, you may see whites on TV looting and rioting for something less as serious as what blacks may protest for. Whites may go crazy, turn over cars, trash cans for their alma mater home team losing a football game. And they're seen as, and I've seen captions such as, crazy kids just having too much fun, or they're a little out of control. Blacks
went to Michigan State. He wouldn't know anything about that.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Oh boy, Mike. Ralph.
I'm sorry, Jackie. Go ahead. Finish.
No, but whites, they I've seen it where they loot and riot for their home team losing, but blacks do the same thing, but more so peacefully for more serious issues, and they're considered animals and menaces to societies, doing the same exact thing, if not more peaceful. And the media perception is reality, so they'll take the small few that are actually tearing stuff up, and they'll let that be a representation of everybody as a whole. And it's like, again, you're reinforcing that stereotype. You're reinforcing it over and over, so.
Thanks, Jared, for that support. MSU. Dewan, you wanted to jump into the riots and the protest and get their thoughts on that. And so Mike started getting into it. So
piggybacking off of that, that's one perspective, and it's like, even what you're saying is brave and bold to say that right now, because everybody's saying that, like, it almost to me feels like, and this is my own, I'm not projecting this on anybody else, it almost to me feels like, we are trying to shame people and condemn people on the property, right? And we didn't have that same energy coming from the same voices when it comes to people being killed, right? And that part was kind of frustrating to me with the whole thing. Now, I'm a Detroiter, born and raised in Detroit. I don't want to see Detroit burned down. I don't want to see that. But I think that we send mixed signals as a society when we seem to respond to stuff potentially burning down, right? It's like the protesters and like some of that stuff seems to have gotten attention of some people that we didn't have their attention before when all the protests were simply Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the anthem and whatnot. But you guys sit in a really unique position. So I want to hear your thoughts on, like, you know, when you see, because when things get out of hand, that puts the officers in a situation where they have to do their job, right? Like they have to, I guess, restore order. And I think that's probably the first time I've ever used that term before. But I would say, you know, so yeah, what's your perspective? What's your take on that whole thing and the way we've seen these things play out when it comes to rioting versus peaceful protests? Let's just start there. The rioting and looting and whatnot. Like what's your take on like a proper response to that as a law enforcement agent?
And it's a difficult position to be in because on one hand, I totally understand the anger and the frustration. I've been a black man a lot longer than I've been a police. When I take my uniform off, I'm just a brother riding around in an F-150 with some false gates in the back with some Jordans on. So I totally understand the frustration. And I hate to use but there are people jeopardizing the lives of others. I mean, when you hurling chunks of concrete, when you're setting things on fire, just the chaos, the bad that can come out of chaos as far as the loss of lives. I mean, this whole thing is genesis by the loss of life. So my position is anything that you do that further endangers lives, it's almost self-defeating. I mean, protest, if it opens up dialogue where people are receptive to you now, I understand. But as a solutionaire, what's the end game? You know, we've had several protests around. They were peaceful. They were fantastic. People were being heard. And sometimes that's all people want is to be heard, which is fantastic. But what's the next move? What are we doing now? Do we have something like an ROTC program where we start recruiting African-American, especially African-American males, into the profession of law enforcement? I mean, nobody polices you like you. You know, I can walk into a situation that may seem totally chaotic, recognize who's in charge immediately. We chop it up for 5-10 minutes. It's over. Police can leave now, you know, because somebody said it earlier. The people police themselves at that point. No adult, anybody wants to be told what to do. Some people understand that if I approach you as an adult, not as the police talking to you, but adult to adult, man to man, man to woman, whatever we are, and deal with you on that level, then we can get a lot farther than me walking in, barking at you like it's infuriating. Like I said, I can talk about it for hours. I've never policed that way. You know, working in the schools, I was a school officer for almost 6 years. I never went to work for that 6 years. That was the best job I ever had. I mean, I was able to talk to people on a different level. I knew nearly everyone in that school.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
So it's a lot of work to be done. We've started the conversation to do it. And hey, if it took this for us to get real reform, then hey, let's get it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Lieutenant hit it right on the head. I mean, not much more to be said. I'm all for protesting until you start, you know, tearing stuff up. Even though I get it, I empathize because, again, you know, like Lieutenant said, I'm just like you. You know, that gun and badge and that vest doesn't make me any more of a man than you because I'm suitable and liable to get the same treatment as you off duty in my sweats and in my hoodie. You know, not much more to be said, but it's just unfortunate that, you know, it takes even this much protest to go on just to get the charges heightened because they were 3rd degree murder for a while and then they just got jacked up to 2nd degree. So, I mean, it takes all this just to finally get justice for just charges on 4 officers. I mean, we've got to really put our nails through the skin this deep just to be heard. And I mean, just like it was said before, you know, people are finally realizing what Colin Kaepernick said was true. I mean, I guess people thought we were lying this whole time, you know, I guess, but yeah, it's not so much the protest is like the shovel in the dirt. this is the first step to it. It's what happens afterwards that makes the biggest impact. It's what we do afterwards because, like Lieutenant said, we don't want to protest, kumbaya, come together, then a month later, it's right behind us, and the same thing happens again. So there needs to be an actual halt, an actual mark after the protest, an actual reform, which is going to take quite some time because, this whole system was built upon racism and privilege in itself. So it's going to take a while to dismantle that. But the first step is actually stepping in that right direction.
So you talked about reform, you talked about some things, and you talk about time. It seems like some of the conversations are like, time's up. And, there's a growing movement to defund the police. I don't know how much attention you've paid to it, but to look, man, you guys, and the other thing too is like, it's unarmed people dying. Black people are about 2.5, 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. But white people are being killed too, unarmed. And just across the board, I think people are like, dude, like when you look at some of the footage with the riots and you see peaceful protesters, you see them knock down a 70-plus-year-old dude. It's just like, what is going on? And you see some of these other peaceful protesters, and they're just shooting stuff at it. Like it's just wild. And then you see other people like the guy in Flint who's like, look, we're laying our swords down, and we're gonna march with you. And you see people giving hugs, like you see that, but it's like, dude, how messed up is it when you see just like peaceful protesters like just be pounded? And so like I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on some of the things. There's people that go to this extreme is like, we should just get rid of the police. And then there's other people who are like, we should take a portion of that money and reallocate it towards community-based things, towards mental health things, towards things that are going to kind of build up some of the reasons people even get into crime in the first place. So again, I don't know how much you followed the conversation. I'm just starting to kind of pick things up. So, but how would you respond to that?
The fact that people feel like that is an actual option is really heartbreaking that it's come to that point. For a profession that I love, that it's gone so far south that people are willing to say, you know what, let's just get rid of it as a whole. And one of the things that you said earlier is very true, and I've said it before. If we devoted as much money towards law enforcement as we did towards what leads people to break the law, then there may not be a need for large police forces. When you start talking about economic development, when you really look at most, not all, but most crime, especially property crimes, they're rooted in economic disenfranchisement. So when you give people an opportunity, whether it be at the school level, to sustain themselves, then a lot of times you won't have that. You won't have people to get into the drug selling and any other property crimes and things like that. But I say that I'm ready to live in a society without police? No, not at all, because there are enough predators out there. There are enough people out here who the only thing that keeps them at bay is the idea of some sort of punishment. Then, without that, then what do you do? What do you do with the people who decide that I'm going to victimize people? I'm a predator and this is my prey. What do you do with them? What's the alternative for somebody who has decided that this is the route they want to go? Do you just allow them to exist in society because we've decided without police, okay, what form of deterrence do you have now? So there has to be something in the middle between occupying force and total disbandment of police officers. We can meet in the middle. And I agree, if we spent more money up front, when K through 12, then maybe we wouldn't have to spend so much money on building new prisons and giving some of this equipment to these police departments. So, this is something to think about.
Man, I really appreciate you guys' honesty. I think we got probably at a point where we need to throw ourselves into the conversation as well and not leave you guys hanging. So I think our original thought was we would fade you guys out, but if Steve is in agreement, I think if you guys are open to staying a part of the next 15 minutes before we wrap up, we'd love to have you guys stay and let's just have conversation, right? I think we've You guys have been in the hot seat, and you guys have answered the questions probably more honestly than a lot of us are used to hearing officers answer the questions. So, like, I really, really appreciate that. Steve, I don't know if you have any other questions in front of you.
I just have my last question that I would love to hear them answer, like a quick take, is what does police reform look like then? I mean, because my biggest question now is like, the protests are gonna end at some point, the riots are gonna end, but there needs to be action moving forward. And Officer Walters alluded to the time that it's taken, but like, what if you had your way, what would it look like now? What would it, if you could just kind of wave a magic wand, what is that reform that you're talking about?
Well, and I was just thinking about this. I mean, even just being in Detroit, one thing, I mean, even if you look at it, for the most part, compared to other cities that have these issues of an unarmed black man or woman being killed by the hands of police, Detroit, we really haven't had that many issues pertaining to that.
Well, a few years ago, we were getting fined on a daily basis because of the amount of like violence that was happening and the complaints that were had. I watched a DPD officer like just pummeling a dude in handcuffs simply because he was acting up in the back seat. So, like, I hear you, but
yeah, no, I get that. For myself, I mean, I've seen just more fruit and just, like Lieutenant Jackson said again, I mean, he's been hitting these points, but just having more, what do you call them? Board commissioners, having the community involved, like community relations is very key. That's one of the backbones. You have to know the community you're policing. You have to. I mean, one thing in Detroit that I've noticed being there, it was about relationships. So it doesn't matter if you go to that same troubled house full of domestics, you run into those same knucklehead teens causing havoc. You run into those same drug addicts. You respond to those same businesses getting called. Whatever the case may be, throughout all those different circumstances, you build a relationship with these people and you learn how to better police them just through our relationship. So I feel like we as a community, even being in the schools, I've been able to shed light into some of these kids' fears and their misconceptions of police. Just being in there and hearing the parents and just the members of the communities, hearing their cry and what they have to say, I can actually, from the inside, give my perspective, come out, go to my administration and look and say, hey, this is what people are crying about. If we can link the two together, we can help put the fears away from both law enforcement and the police. We can bring that together into the light and, cooperate as one. But it needs to be more community involvement, absolutely, and more education, more cultural diversity, more how and why we do what we do. Because I hear that a lot. It's like, why did you do this, and how come you guys did that? Why does it take 3 officers to take down such and such, or why not use a taser? I mean, I pepper sprayed a guy in the face, and he literally looked at me and wiped it off and licked his mouth, and I'm like, yo, send me back up. So these conversations we need to have, from both sides.
You've got an immunity.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that pepper spray might have been like expired.
You get money back.
Yeah. Kind of going back to like the riots versus peaceful protesting thing. It's a conversation that we would often have amongst my family members, and we're like all over the place when it comes to that. And I have like strong family members that are like, look, like that's the only thing they hear. I think that Jared might have said, like,
yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes like when you're in a violent society, you only respond to violence, right? And I recently made a comment on another talk show that I didn't get a chance to flesh it out, and I don't want to leave anybody thinking that like I'm pro like riots, right? In the sense of like damaging things or putting people in position to get hurt. Not that I'm for that. Like if you follow me like in the next 10 days, like you'll hear me announce a way that you can riot in a very peaceful way that will lead to systemic change. But you're gonna have to stay tuned and follow us and follow me to hear more about that. But my biggest issue, my biggest problem with that is, right, because I am somebody that, like, when I believe in something and I feel like I'm on the right side of a decision, like, I am willing to go to whatever lengths you need to go to, right? And even if that means like putting myself in harm's way, if I feel that strongly about a subject matter. But when you have a large group of people, I don't think that all those people came there willing to go to that degree, right? I think some of those people came and they just wanted to hold a sign, march, and go home. And I think that when you set it off in that way and you start tearing stuff up and putting yourself in a position where you put law enforcement in a situation where they have to respond, I think that you just made a decision for other people that didn't sign up for that. And that's one of the biggest issues I have when you're talking about like riots versus peaceful protests, right? I don't want to ever do something that's going to ignite it. And because I'm there and I'm like that fed up where I've made that decision for myself, I set it off and now everybody else is getting ready to get the same ramifications that I would get. Like, I just think that that's not necessarily thought through or talked about oftentimes in that situation. That's my kind of 2 cents on that subject matter.
Yeah.
DeJuan, I agree 2,000%. And that is one of the things that, you know, if you look at any Facebook feed now, people are very angry. So, you know, out of that anger, that raw emotion, people say things that sometimes they really don't mean. And one of my things is, I think it's kind of cowardly and hypocritical to condone a behavior that you know you wouldn't do yourself. So if you have somebody saying, yeah, tear it up, but you know, well, no, I will be out there too, but I got to go to work tomorrow. Don't condone things that you know you wouldn't do.
You must got some of the same Facebook friends as me.
Yeah, so, you know, that's my issue with it. Like, if you bought that action, that, hey, man, you know, don't put your mask on, go down there, run through that one, if that's what you're about, then that's what you're about. Hey, great. But those other people down there who wanted to be heard, and then you throw a brick, and then now all of a sudden everybody getting tear gas. Like you said, hey man, I didn't sign up for that. I came down here to protest. I wanted to show my kids, like, this is one way to be heard. This is one way to be seen. And then all of a sudden it's been turned into Grand Theft Auto. So no, you know, if they should have, okay, tonight is going to be riot night, only come down if you about tearing up stuff. So people know, don't come down here and intermingle with the peaceful protesters. Here's your night to go to jail. So we know not to come on that night. But yeah, like you said, don't do things to jeopardize other people who didn't sign up for that.
So DeJuan, you wanted to transition?
Yeah, no. So I don't know. I'm not sure if we have anybody that was interested in jumping on, sharing their thoughts, sharing their questions with us live. Do we have that information for them if they want to? Can we give them the number?
So yeah,
if they want to jump on.
Yeah, if you wanna get on the show, text that phone number right there, 313-473-0499. Just put your name and, you know, your comment or question. We'll bring you on. We'll send you a link along with some rules. We want to have people from every perspective, and we commit ourselves to be respectful, and that's what we ask other people to. So we have a list of rules we'll send you. If you want to jump on the show with us, ask your question, make your comment. I see a lot of people commenting from all over the place. Raymond, who's from he's in England. You know, we usually have some Jamaicans on here, a bunch of Americans from all over the place. Got a guy originally from Iraq. Safe, what's up?
Y'all didn't know y'all was coming on an international show, did y'all?
Yeah. So we got Jamaicans in Canada too. So what's up, Steven? Dennis, good to see you. JB, Lucy's got a lot of comments. Eugene too, he's been very active. And Jared Pratt, go green. Love the love, man.
Don't stop that. So Francis Anderson did want to ask a question. I think I was shooting for the second part of this whole like page you sent me, Fran. I hope you're still watching. And Sarah Ray says she's checking in from Cali. So Fran said, what changes would you recommend be implemented to address the current issues that we're facing? I think she's talking about with the police force. I know you gave some examples, but I think we were talking specifically about like disinvestment from the police force.
One of the things that I see that has worked, a lot of departments, just because of budgetary issues, have gone away from it, was just designated community police officers. You know, you would have an entire section, just like you would have a detective bureau or you'd have whatever, that their sole purpose was community interaction. So if there was a particular officer assigned to a particular community, when they had a problem, that's what they went to. And obviously you had your regular patrol officers who rode around and answered calls for service. But those police officers were designated to address issues within the community. So people felt comfortable talking to. You know, a lot of times people talk about, you know, the no snitching and the misnomer of black on black crime and all of that crap. Is it because people just don't trust the fact that if I tell you this, that you're going to keep my name safe because I have to live here. And that's one of the things that I've always pressed upon, especially younger officers, you know, when they would say things like, well, why don't more people speak up? Because they have to live here. You know, you have to live. It's hard to tell on the bad guy next door when you have to see this dude every day and he's going to know you're the one that told on him. So a lot of times it's not out of just, well, I don't have any, you know, I don't care about my community. It's I live here. I have kids here. So sometimes it's fear. But when you have an officer who's assigned to that community where people feel even the quote unquote bad guy knows, oh, that's Officer so-and-so, and I better get my stuff together because I'm not going to be able to operate here if I don't. So to me, that's the first step I would take is bringing back. And if you're talking about defunding, I would just say refunding. You take money that may have been designated for one thing and you start applying it towards things that benefit the community. And that's, in my opinion, that's one of the first things we should do.
Yeah. So I got a question from Courtney Nellis. Thanks for that answer. What's up, Rita Singleton? I see you out there tuning in. Courtney Nellis says, what about reinstating residency requirements for police? What are your thoughts on that?
I love that.
I happen to be both cities I worked for. I lived in those cities. I call anybody I live in my community, that's my neighbor. And, you know, I don't want to get into where people live because if that's the case, then you go across the board. I understand law enforcement's a little bit different, but then the argument's made, well, why don't this person who works in this profession have to live there? Why don't doctors have to live in the communities they work? I've just always felt like, you know, I'm going to police where I live. So that was my philosophy. When I lived in Detroit, I worked in Detroit. When I moved to Romulus, I became a police officer in Romulus. So there is a lot of validity to how people conduct themselves when they're held accountable by their neighbors. But to just say that residency is going to be the answer, you know, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, that's true. I also feel it's not just one answer. I mean, you know, on one side, you know, when I was in Detroit, working for Detroit, I lived in Detroit as well. And for myself, for me personally, yes, I did have more of a heart, and I went that extra, not saying I didn't before, but I even went that extra 2%, 3% since I knew that I was actually there and I actually experienced the same troubles as the neighbors next door because, you know, I'm right around the block from wherever this issue happened. I mean, it allowed me to be even more passionate about it, knowing that I'm resting my head in the same area that you are, you know, so that actually helped. But I mean, I've seen it also where officers who live way out in the sticks, they're just as compassionate and they care just as much about the community, even though they don't live there. But also I've seen where officers who don't live there, they can just kind of half do the job, you know, and not really give much of an effort. So I feel like it's not really much of an answer. I mean, a concrete answer, but, you know, knowing your community is always key, like I said. Knowing the who's and the what's, you know, your typical knuckleheads, you know, where the hot spots are, because that allows you to, you know, police and, you know, make change more effectively.
Yeah, so that's good. We're gonna bring somebody in 1 second, Ralph. I would say if you want to get in and jump in and with your question, jump on with us real quick. Flash the number back up for him one more time, Ralph. Get in. You got like 10 minutes.
Yeah,
15
shut it
seconds
down.
to get in. We're gonna shut it down in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So somebody get on live. I really believe in the residency requirement. I wish that there was a way for us to kind of like re-implement that. I got friends that are in ministry that have relocated to Detroit. They have like something that's really it's happened a lot over the last 10 years with a lot of church plants happening as the demographics started to change and like Detroit became a hot spot to come to. And I just remember being, and Steve knows the story, I remember being invited to come and be a ref for a 3-on-3 tournament that was going to be held at Pingree Park over on Burns on the east side. And I remember going, and I remember like it was a 3-on-3 tournament put on by a church that I used to go to, and they had, put it on. It was really live. All the neighborhood came out to check it out, and they had a couple security guards. One was black and one was white, and the white guy was armed, and you could tell that he was not familiar. Where'd I go?
He wasn't familiar with the neighborhood.
Yeah, he wasn't familiar with the neighborhood. Am I still on? Because I can't see.
Yeah, you're on. You're good. Keep going.
All right. Well, I'll roll with it. Yeah, he wasn't familiar with the neighborhood at all. And the interesting thing was, at a certain, I saw him. I don't know what's that. All right,
Going,
let's bring in the caller.
but no, I mean, just to finish your point, though. I mean, there's a bit. You can bring him in. Whoever it is, they could stay up for this. But I agree. I think there's a big difference. Like, I don't think you can understand like culture. Like, I think one of the biggest things in culture is like being in it and understanding and having like Officer Walters was saying, is like you have a vested interest to see this go well. And so, yeah, I get the whole doctor thing, but I think, and I don't think this is the answer, but I definitely think I always look at like the whole picture. Like, I don't think there is an answer. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I think this would definitely be helpful. And I think in Detroit, it's huge specifically.
All right, bring him on in, Ralph.
Hey, good evening, guys. Thank you so much for putting me on. I've been watching the show, and I really appreciate the guys coming in from the police force and representing. I think that's a fantastic move, and I haven't seen much of that out there on social media, so I really appreciate that.
Welcome. Introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
So my name is Rahman. I'm actually based in North Carolina. I originally came from the UK. But I've been in the US for around 15, 20 years.
Yeah. All right. What's your comment or question, Rahman?
I mean, I haven't been on the show completely. There may have been some points that have been discussed that I wasn't privy to at that time. My question really relates to 2 points. One is, I mean, in the police force, it's very much tactical. Like what you're talking about is tactical activity that you can do at the grassroots level. But I'm more of a strategic guy, and I tend to look at things in the big picture. And so what I'm looking at is the issue of Black consciousness, where that stands, Black culture. And what does it take to be a Black person in America right now? What is that what is that standard? What is that vision? What is that ideal? Who is the Black American in the USA? And who stands for that? Who's the leadership? Like, I feel that right now George Floyd is the leader of the Black community, because I don't see like an MLK or a Malcolm X or a Muhammad Ali, somebody standing out that's representing all the black people as one black identity. So I feel that black consciousness really needs a representation. At the moment, it's George Floyd, but someone needs to take that mantle. So I'm looking at those kind of issues and I'm saying, if there was this standard of identity of what the black man is in America, then people can rally around that. And, there wouldn't be that rioting potentially taking place because you have an ideal that exists. So what is that ideal that the black community are trying to represent and become?
That's a great question. I will take a stab at it. Steve, let me know. Are you guys hearing me twice like I'm hearing me?
There's a little bit of echo, a little bit of feedback, but we can hear you clearly.
Nice. So I would say it's a layered question. We don't have one person that we would point to and say this is.
All right, now it's feeding back. I don't know what it is. You got any headphones you can throw in? Well, if one of these other gentlemen want to take a stab at that.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll jump back in once I get my headphones. Take me backstage so I can find my headphones, bro.
Piggyback real quick on what Dewan started with. It's having like what you described as black people aren't monolithic. The one thing, if you put 5,
I don't think we can hear Mr. Jackson.
Oh, I'm hearing him.
Okay, on my end, I don't hear him.
What about now? Can you hear me now?
Are you hearing him, Ramon? Did you? No. I don't know why that is. He said, "How about now?" Did you hear him?
Yeah. Can you speak again? I can't hear you. Sorry.
Yeah. What about now?
No, I can't. Maybe you can relay any point that I need to hear, Steve.
Okay, I'll just continue. When you talk about a black consciousness, black people want the same thing that any other people want. I mean, we want to be treated fairly. We want to be judged. I mean, Dr. Martin Luther King said it. We don't want to be judged by our skin. We don't want to be seen as something different. Just because we have the 4% that separates us physiologically, our skin color and a few other things, should not be indicative of how we're treated. So it's not that we need just one black savior to step up. Black people want the same treatment that anybody else wants. We don't want to be judged by the way we look or by somebody's perception of or some stereotype. It's the same thing that anyone else wants. If you put 10 people of similar backgrounds, similar ideals, they all want the same thing. They want to be treated the same. So not to say that we need the reason the MLKs and the Malcolm X's and those type of people and the Muhammad Ali's were as outspoken as they were is the same reason anyone else was, because they at that time they wanted the same thing. It's not that George Floyd, correct? I'm sorry, has become the face of black people, the black leader. He just happened to be the embodiment of what black people have been saying for the last 400 years. Enough is enough.
Yeah. So, Ramon, I don't think you heard any of that, right? So let me just summarize real quickly. So he said, black people want the same thing as everybody else. They want to be judged by the content of their character. He referenced Dr. King, and the same things that everybody has, everybody else has access to. Like that's what they want. Part of the reason, like you hear these voices that have stepped up at particular times in history is because they are advocating for, like, look. And Dr. King, I think, did a great job of this because he pointed us back to the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. But he's like, look, we're American. I saw a Black Lives Matter guy like stand up at a Trump rally, be like, we are American. We want what Americans want. Like what you guys have, like we want people to be prosecuted. So that's like the gist of it. But he's saying, that like that's, judged by the content of character. What they want is not a whole lot of difference from what we claim that America is and offers to people. Hopefully that's a good way to summarize it. I know I missed a lot of stuff, but
so I hope you can hear me clearly.
Much better.
Great. So Lucy Fry, aka Namdi from Namdi's Knowledge Cafe over on Oakman Boulevard.
I think DeJuan's talking. I don't think we can hear him.
Can you hear me?
I can hear him.
All right, cool. I'll keep going. Can anybody else hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. All right. So I think we may be missing one. Anyway, she said because we all are representing ourselves, we have a lot of big mamas now who represent our people. So here's my take and my stab at it, right? I think that a big part of what reasons we don't see us having one leader, there's a couple of reasons. One, I think somebody said we're not monolithic, right? So it's really hard to get a consensus as to exactly what direction we should go in. I think that by kind of like committee, Black Lives Matters has stepped up to be one of those leaders as an organization. And I think that's a much safer approach. I often have the same question, and I wonder, is a part of it that inevitably, like, that Black leader ends up being killed, right? And paying the ultimate sacrifice, right? It's like, that's not a threat or not a concern for George Floyd, because unfortunately, he's already paid that price. But I think that I often wonder if subconsciously, do we resist the temptation of identifying a leader for fear that we're setting that person up to succumb to the way that this nation has often treated our leaders, right? Like, it's hard to find one that really had a platform and an agenda that really moved the needle in a significant way that did not die.
So was Barack Obama, like, where does he fall into that?
So I mean, I think that Barack Obama, like, he played a different role, right? Like, and he would say this himself, right? It's like, you think of him like he had to work from directly within the system. I think that, you need prophet to speak to king, to speak to the king, not Martin Luther King, right? But you need a prophet, right? So like, he wore the hat, the crown. But you need somebody that's going to speak directly for the people. And it's hard to do both. And I don't think that he was in position to do both. So that's why I think that he could not wear that hat. Maybe he could try to now that he's not sitting in that seat. But sitting in that seat, you need somebody else that's going to push the envelope and put some pressure on you in order for you to do what the people need you to do, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Somebody's asking if he could do it now.
Yeah. Do you mind if I add a little bit?
Yep. Go ahead.
I mean, I feel that the cause is bigger than the person. That if you look at Lincoln, if you look at Gandhi, if you look at MLK, if you look at Malcolm X, they all died, but the movement shifted, the consciousness shifted. There was a level of shift change. You get what I'm saying? And any leader that's going to be taking on the role of, like, the movement needs a voice. You called it a prophet, a spiritual leader, a guide, someone that is able to articulate and express the voice of the masses in a very sophisticated and succinct way. And, it's inherent within that title, within that leadership role, that death is likely. And I'm saying that, is there a person that is willing to take on that mantle, that mission, recognizing that death is likely and inevitable? History has shown that. And so anybody who's taking on that responsibility knows that their life is not as great as the mission. The mission is much more important.
So, it's a great question. I would say that remains to be seen, right? That remains to be seen. One, that person would have to rise and get everybody to follow him. And I don't know if we ever had one person that everybody even followed, right? Like, you still had different people that would stand in agreement. Lucy Fry just said we have Minister Farrakhan. He has thousands, but they don't publicize it because because if he did, he would get 1 million more, right? So like even that, like you would have people to be like, nah, you know what I mean? I'm not going in that direction. So, but I think that if you're saying that the timing is right and it's necessary and it's needed, I think that I would say I agree with you. But it remains to be seen if that's going to happen. Right now, I think that Black Lives Matter is doing a really good job of welcoming people from across all like divides to stand in agreement. And I think they've weathered a storm because they've been under attack. But right now, you got people from all walks of life joining that movement. So that's my 2 cents. We had an hour and 35, and we still got people on shooting questions, being active. But I want to respect. Go ahead.
Just real quick, Dwan. Even just kind of put in my little 2 cents, Ramon. I mean, like it's been stated, we have had leaders, our MLKs, our Stokely Carmichaels, our Medgar Evans, those who have rose up to try to take up the challenge. And even though their sacrifice of human life, which seems to be a common pattern, it did lead to the change and the better lifestyle of the thousands and millions of blacks that came after them. I think it is a part fear. I think a part of it is fear that, some of us maybe feel we don't want to go through that ultimate sacrifice. But we do have young innovators that are coming up. Us millennials, we are coming up, throughout the Black Lives Matter movement. Certain movements like the New Era Detroit, certain movements without Detroit, and just all over the country. It's like we're up and rising, but at the same time, we have a system that has been against us and still is against us. So even though we're trying to do right, it's like we're still getting pulled down at the same time. I mean, you look on YouTube. I'm a fan of one who tries to stay away from social media, but you look, I mean, we can't barbecue outside. We can't study at a university. We can't go in our own apartment building. We can't do the simple things of life because we're always seen as the target. I mean, people say, for example, well, if you just pull your pants up, you just do X, Y, and Z, stop feeling sorry for yourselves, then maybe things will change for you. But it's like we can do everything right and things still go wrong. When we finally start to come together as a community and start to support Black businesses and start to be there for one another, we're seen as, we're segregating ourselves against everybody else. And it's like we're getting lashed out at for, trying to actually do right amongst each other. So, I mean, you can still do things right and things still go wrong,
Yeah, I mean, that was my point about having like a Black consciousness, a Black identity that everybody can rally around, that even if you have people going against you, then what that identity is, and you can reject their opinions. You get what I'm saying?
So Waka, who's Ethiopian, actually said, what if the question was, what is or are an idea or a set of ideas that all Black people will get behind instead of a person or a leader? Which is similar to what you're just saying, Ramon.
Is that a question back to me?
It was just, I think it was to everybody. I think
okay.
He had just commented right before you said that, so it's interesting that came together like that.
And what was it that he said again, Steve?
What if the question was, what is or are an idea or a set of ideas all Black people will get behind instead of a person or a leader? So, I would just say the complicated thing about leadership too is that like it's not as simple as somebody just choosing to be a leader. Like one of the things is like if you go for a walk, if you're you think you're a leader and you're going for a walk and no one's following, you're just going for a walk. But like even looking at the dynamics of how Dr. King kind of rose, like he didn't necessarily put himself in a position. There was a series of like things that happened with Malcolm X. There's a series of things that happen, and just it's almost like when luck is when preparation meets opportunity, that kind of thing. There's so many different dynamics. We're also in a very different world right now as far as social media, and so many people have platforms that are doing different so many different things. But yeah, we can. I mean, if you guys want to get into Walker's question at all, and even touching on what Ramon just said as well, like, is there an idea or a set of ideas people can get behind? And maybe Lieutenant Jackson said that already, which is like, shoot, we want to be like treated like all the other Americans.
And that's it. I mean, I think the set of ideals are outlined in the Constitution.
I mean, from
Whatever
my
the parents-
perspective,
Hold on, Ramon. I know you can't hear, but Lieutenant Jackson is speaking.
Yeah, like I was saying, the set of ideals are already laid out. I mean, that's what we want. We want, like Mike said, to be able to do the same things that everybody else does without the scrutiny or the skepticism, if you will, of that we're up to no good. You know, I want to be able to walk down the street. I want my kids to be able to walk down the street and just be looked at as, oh, there's a couple kids walking down the street, or there's a man going for a jog, or there's somebody that's falling asleep in the library. We don't want the suspicion. That's what, you know, and it's I don't want to sound like I'm oversimplifying the question or being dismissive of the question, but it's simple. That's what we want. You know, getting behind a black conscience, that's what we want. We want the same things that everyone else wants. If whatever's outlined as an American, if these are the things that as an American citizen you're entitled to by no other standard of just other than you're an American citizen, this is what we want. We don't want to be, you know, I've been in situations as a police officer where, you know, anybody that's been around black people for any period of time, we're animated, we're demonstrative, we talk with our hands. You know, if something's funny, we might take off running when we're laughing. I don't need to be. I've watched guys who may not be as familiar with our culture. Hey, calm down, buddy. He's not excited. What are you talking about? He's not upset. So we want to have the same standard that everyone else has. We don't want to be viewed with suspicion. We want to be viewed as just as I'm an American citizen. I'm a human being. Leave me alone, and that's it.
Somebody want to summarize that for Ramon, because I know he didn't hear any of it. Just to.
Okay, so he was saying that we want to be treated like human beings. Like we want to be able to conduct ourselves the way that feels normal for us, without having to give explanation, without having to fit within the parameters of what other cultures would say and define as normal. And we want to be able to do normal things like go to the library and doze off, you know, go for a jog, right? Bird watch, right? Like just normal basic things, right? He said like that's what we really desire. The irony of like Lieutenant Jackson being an officer and saying that's what we want just reminds us of how nuanced this conversation is, and that we really have like many layers to peel from the onion, because he's an officer saying the same thing that like Black Lives Matter have been saying. So I think that at the end of the day, like we're so intertwined and so connected, but like America has done a number on us and helping us create and draw lines in the sand, and we need to figure out how to cross those lines and embrace each other, and let go of some of the fear. And the thought of that as a Black man is scary to me, to let go of the fear and to where I have to like trust, cross a line and really embrace people that I don't know. Like it's easy for me to do that with Steve. Been knowing Steve for probably 8 to 10 years, right? But the thought of being able to do that, you know, like me and Steve are part of a group called Facing Race. And one of the things that I shared was that I'm trying to raise my children in a way to embrace what they see me doing and cross-cultural divides and develop real relationships and brotherhood with people from different cultures. But I still have to teach them to be careful, because there are white people that mean them no good, right? And I don't want them to see me connecting with Steve and many of my other friends and then let their guard down and put themselves in harm's way when there's different ways that they can be careful. And again, it's complicated, but that's me being honest. We're at an hour and 44 minutes. We have loved having you all on the show. Again, we could talk to you guys forever. We still have people with us on the live. We appreciate y'all. We appreciate the questions and the comments. And we will be back here at 9 o'clock next Sunday. So please come back and join us. And we promise if the officers want to come back on, we will invite them back on. Probably not next Sunday, but we look forward to having them on as well. Thank y'all. Steve, you got final word.
No, that's it. I'm very appreciative of you guys all coming on here. One of the ways you guys could support us, we don't, we spend a lot of time and thought, and Ralph behind the scenes is like working super hard. One of the things that would help us is to share this with other people who you think could benefit from it. I've really appreciated the insight from police. Like, I was personally just enlightened through this conversation, and I think a lot of people, I think there's a lot of mystery around what protocols are and how accountability works, and I think they got into a lot of that. But if you could share our YouTube channel as well. I know a lot of our Facebook friends are here and will kind of come and gather. We also want to reach a broader audience. We want to have like real conversations, the conversations that people haven't been having, to get to like the dirt and the muck in our own hearts and minds, so that we can weed out some of this stuff and hopefully start making some changes, turning in some different directions, and also just talk about, okay, how can we get involved? Like, how can I? So if you could share it with people, you can let people know. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be great. I'll make sure there's a link posted in one of our, under these videos, so you can go there too. So, but thank you to all the guests. You guys have been amazing. I know we went way over what we said. I appreciate you staying on. I know you have other things to do. That's it.
That's it. So join us back again here.
I appreciate you guys having us.
No doubt.
It was good.
Thanks. So come back next Sunday, 9 o'clock. We will not have a shortage of things to discuss. And why is that, Ralph?
This is America.
I have a dream.
These are animals. America preaches integration and practices segregation.
Why did you say Mexico?
A rising tide of discontent.
The South will rise again. I have a dream.
We have contrasting visions about what America is. America is.
This is America.
Peace.
Alrighty.
Peace, y'all.